Can you see this here? This is the perfect right here. This is the painting that's been on there for all these years. You can tell that he's holding an instrument in the picture. It was made by a guy by the name of Duffenpruger and a Frenchman by the name of Derezi. I'm not sure how to pronounce the name. There's also a tree up here in the scroll part. And this is the head that I'm so proud of. That's the prettiest carving right there. Plus, I'm gonna let you see if you can see it on the sides here that nobody's really been able to tell me. I'm gonna move it slow. It's all the way around it. You know, it kind of slips up on you when a tune like that is played a lot. But I wrote the tune back in 1948 or 49, I believe it was, or 47. It's called Lonesome Fiddle Blues. Since that time, a lot of people has recorded it. Charlie Daniels has put some words called Devil Went to Georgia. It's the same tune. I just feel lucky that it's been used a lot.
It requires precision in construction, but also inspiration. It requires precision in performance, but also inspiration. And so violin playing depends a great deal on a precision which is unbelievable, because it is not only the precision of pitch, which is measured in millimeters on the fingerboard of the violin, it's the precision of the little accent, the stress, the little crescendo, diminuendo, the quality of the vibrato, the placing of the bow, all these things, and they all exist and they have to be learned, but in the final analysis, they are governed by the moment and not by the preconceived master plan. It's not a moment that has been totally planned before so that the audience is only aware of a blueprint. That wouldn't rouse the audience. The audience can only be touched by something which is actually happening at that very moment. I've always been fascinated by the violinists who are born to improvise, or even if they don't improvise, they play everything since babyhood from memory. The folk fiddlers whom you know. And they convey something to the audience because they're free. This idea of having a music stand in front of you and all the rest, although it is an essential part of classical performance, they are liberated from it. That's why I loved working with Grappelli or with Ravi Shankar, the great Indian sitar player, because at least that way, I, who was bred and born a classical violinist, had the opportunity of rubbing shoulders with someone who was improvising. I dare say this young man works relatively little on etudes and scales, that he hasn't been trained in the style of Bach and Beethoven and Hindemith and Debussy and Bartók and all the rest, which he probably couldn't play. He couldn't play because he never leaves the first position, or hardly. But what is common to him and the Scotch fiddlers I've known is the fact that they have this incredible solid sense of rhythm, that they never play out of tune, even if their fingers have shorn sheep and handled apiaries and honey and all the rest. They are, and even if they have drunk a little more whiskey than they should, but they always play with the same kind of vitality. And it's the fact that they have been born to it, that they did it from their earliest years.
Well, the first church we had in that part of the eastern Kentucky mountains was the old regular Baptists, and they were very strict. Almost anything was a sin that wasn't going to church and singing hymns, and especially on Sunday, it was a very, very strict time. They felt that anything that had to do with musical instruments was an unwanted addition, that God wouldn't like it if you added instruments, that he just wanted to hear men speaking to him or singing to him, but he didn't want harmonies because harmonies were frivolous. So they were terribly strict people. Love somebody, yes I do. Love somebody, yes I do. Love somebody, yes I do. Love somebody, and it may be you. Twice 16's 32, twice 16's 32, twice 16's 32. Sally, won't you have me do, gal, do? Dance all night, fiddle all day, dance all night, fiddle all day, dance all night, fiddle all day. That's the soldier's joy, they say. Love somebody fond and true, love somebody fond and true, love somebody fond and true, love somebody, I guess it's you. Twice 16's 32, twice 16's 32, twice 16's 32. Sally, won't you have me do, gal, do? Dance all night, fiddle all day, dance all night, fiddle all day, dance all night, fiddle all day, and that's the soldier's joy, they say. The dulcimer was our first instrument, this instrument that I just played, and even that the church didn't condone. And when the fiddle came in, it was even worse, because the fiddle, when someone started to play the fiddle, nobody could keep from dancing, and dancing was sinful. And the fiddle just swept everybody up away with emotion. All the old preachers and the old folks referred to the fiddle as the instrument of the devil. I guess that had a double meaning. It was an instrument, and it was also an instrument to sin, you know. It was instrumental to bad behavior.
Hardingfela har vært i bruk siden midten på 1600-tallet. Og i gamle dager da, så var hardingfela sett på som djevelens instrument av kyrkja. Hardingfelemusikken hadde veldig sterk virkning på menneskesinnet. Så det var mange som ble drigne imot den musikken og ble veldig fascinert av den. Og det ble en konkurranse til religion. Og det virket på en slik måte at særlig pietisten da, fikk brent veldig mye instrument.
The preachers didn't like them at all. Every time the preachers would find them, they would take the fiddles and break them over a rock. And there was one old preacher that was the worst of them. His name was Cedarhead Combs. They called him Cedarhead because he had a big shock of red hair that stood up in front of his forehead and went straight back, and it was kind of square on the sides. And his hair was bright red, and he looked like a man with a block of wood on top of his head. So I guess they didn't dare call him Blockhead. They called him Cedarhead. And he was the strictest one of all. And he was just break up every fiddle in sight and wouldn't let his boys have any fun at all. And Dad said they got to hiding out in the woods, and they would take their homemade fiddles and go out in the woods way where Cedarhead couldn't hear. He was kind of hard of hearing. And they would play their music. They would play the Soldier's Joy tune. They would play Old King Cole. They would play all those old tunes. And hide the fiddle out in the woods so the next time they came out, they'd just get it out and play it. They had a big holler log they hid them in. Well, one day they were clearing the new ground, and they were rolling logs, and they'd take their hoe handles and put them under a log and prise it up, and it would go bouncing and rolling and leaping down the hill. And they kept surrounding this one big holler log. They didn't want to roll it. And Cedarhead finally said, "Come on, boys, let's get this biggin'. You're all afraid to roll this, and it's too heavy for you." So he poked his hoe handle under it, and all the boys kind of gathered around, and they had to help him because they couldn't get out of it. And they rolled that log, and it started leaping down the hill, and fiddles flew every way. They all come flying out of that holler log. And Cedarhead went leaping down the hill right after him, gathering them up and beating them and banging them over rocks. And they said, Cedarhead tore up hell on the hillside that day.
The dervishes, they have a dance, where they're whirling around all the time. And it says that when they do this, for a long time, they go into a trance and they levitate. But there is a similar story from Norway. It's about this girl. She was very poor, and her name was Fantelodda. A fant, that's a vagabond, and a lodd, that's a felt slipper. She was so poor, she couldn't afford leather shoes. So she wore felt shoes. But she was very fond of dancing. She went to all the dances in the valley. There was one time said that all the men were tired of dancing, but she wanted to dance more. And then a stranger came in to the dance and bid her up to dance. They started to dance, the fiddler played. And the stranger, he twirled her around and around and around and around, faster and faster. And all of a sudden, she floated up and hung up under the ceiling. People were shocked and scared, and they thought the girl was dead. The story goes, anyway, that she danced with the devil.
This is a tune I learned from Jean Carignan, who was from Quebec, and he was a great fiddle player. He's dead now too, unfortunately, but he taught me this tune, La Rille du Pendu, or the Hangman's Reel, and basically about, or the story I had was, it was about a fellow who lived in a French-Canadian village and had committed some crime he was going to be hanged for. I don't think it was murder, maybe adultery or something like that. And, but he was the local fiddle player, so just as they were about to hang him, they realized that if they did hang him, they wouldn't have a fiddle player for the Saturday night dances, which they were all upset about. So in order to give him a chance, they retuned the fiddle in a C-sharp A, E-A tuning, and said if he could play a tune on it that they liked, they wouldn't hang him. So standing there with the rope around his neck, he obviously wasn't going to play anything slow. The adrenaline was kind of high at the time. So this is the tune that he supposedly composed, and it was known ever after as the Hangman's Reel. But in actual fact, the tune comes from Norway, where it's called the Devil's Polka. But it went over to Canada, and some guy learned it, and this is the story that they invented to go along with the tune, which is what happens to music almost everywhere it goes. But it's a great tune, anyway. The Hangman's Reel.
Well, really and truly, the right name of that tune was The Road of Loris Moor. And that's where it happened, was at Loris Moor. It's a bay off the Donegal coast. And this man, as far as I know, his name was Helferty. And he was coming home one morning from a wedding. And at that time, you see, the wedding dances and all went on till morning. And of course, it was all heavy drinking of the home brew. It was all potching, of course. There was no such thing as going to pubs or places or hotels that him to buy drink. It was made locally. So he had a lot this night. So as he was crossing along the bay, he had an ear cut near the sea. Didn't he get very heavy and sleepy? And he laid down beside the fiddle and fell asleep. And when he wakened up in the morning, the tide was nearly in. And actually it was coming up near enough to himself. But with the roars of the sea coming in all night, he had this in his ears. But he caught the fiddle and he composed this tune. Near enough to what he heard, he thought himself. But this was what he heard. And a lot of places it's known as the Atlantic Roar, or Tuam na Farraga, or the Roar of Loris Moor, he called it, because it was in Loris Moor it happened.
There's a very ancient connection between breath and spirit, or between the mighty rushings of winds and the movement of the spirit. In Western tradition, Western Christian tradition, is most vividly recorded in the moment of Pentecost, when, with the rushing of a mighty wind, the tongues of flame descend and the Spirit enters the upper room. And the apostles are ready to receive this visitation. And it's a motif that goes right through, artistic inspiration also. I heard the story from the composer, Sean O'Riada, and he had got it from a fiddler. He hears a tune being played that comes in on the wind out of the Atlantic. So I did this poem based on that, and it's called The Given Note. On the most westerly Blasket, in a dry stone hut, he got this air out of the night. Strange noises were heard by others who followed, bits of a tune coming in on loud weather, though nothing like melody. He blamed their fingers and ear as unpracticed, their fiddling easy, for he had gone alone into the island and brought back the whole thing. The house throbbed like his full violin. So whether he calls it spirit music or not, I don't care. He took it out of wind off mid-Atlantic. Still he maintains from nowhere. It comes off the bow gravely, rephrases itself into the air.
The name of the tune is Vårflaumen, which means the spring flooding, or you can say the forces of spring. And here you can hear the brooks are murmuring under the snow up in the mountains, and they're starting to run down towards the valley. The big river at the bottom of the valley, all its power is increasing, you know, and gushing towards the sea. And at the same time, you also hear the mild spring air also coming in over the mountains.
There was a fiddler down near Cloughan, and he really had only one tune that he could play, and he was invited to a wedding in Letterhilly, which was about a mile from... Letterhilly is a lonely place at the foot of Goggin Mountain in the Cross area of Donegal. And he was invited to play at this wedding, but he was very downhearted because he had only the one tune, and he was afraid that he would be the laughingstock of the people at the wedding. So he went along the road towards the house where the wedding crowd were gathered, and very dejected. And on the road he met a little man with red hair, a Fadra Barua, and the little man said, "Why are you so dejected?" And he said, "Well, I have been asked to play at a wedding, and I have only the one tune." So he had the fiddle with him. So the little man said, "Give me that fiddle till I see." And the little fella strummed on the fiddle, tuned it, and played a tune on it, and then he handed it back to this man. And he said, "Now," he said, "you go to the wedding, and I'll promise that there'll not be a fiddler in Donegal who'll be like you." And off he went to the wedding, feeling a wee bit more cheerful. And that night, he amazed everybody at the wedding because he had every tune they could ask for: jigs, reels,